That's exactly right. So I understand because I see it in my grocery bill. I see it in my gas bill, the numbers going up. And it wasn't that long ago in my life that really would have hurt, that I had to watch the gas bill and the grocery bill very carefully. But now that I've got some money in the bank, it doesn't hurt me nearly as much as it hurts the working class, someone like my mom who's on a retiree's, pension, and folks out there who really have to watch paycheck to paycheck what the grocery bill is and what the gas bill is. So yes, I'll get hit by Biden's new tax policies, I'm sure. But your point is you can't heave a sigh of relief when he does all this spending if you're not among the so-called rich, because you're going to be paying for it one way or another.
Yeah, in fact, a lot of people who are rich end up benefiting from inflation because inflation also pushes up the value of assets that a lot of rich people own. But unfortunately, a lot of middle-class Americans don't own those assets. They just get stuck with the bill. They earn wages, but their wages don't rise nearly as much as the cost of living. And so even though they get a bigger paycheck, they're actually earning less because when they go to spend those dollars, they can't buy nearly as much stuff. And that's why inflation is the worst way to pay for government. It's the most regressive form of taxation. It hits hardest those who can least afford to pay. That is the biggest problem because Biden wants to pretend that we're getting all this government for free. Nothing is free, especially government. And whenever the government claims you're getting something for nothing, it's a lie. They're just trying to win your vote, but that you don't realize that they're buying your vote with your own money.
Mm-hmm. So explain this to me, because this is I didn't totally understand it, but I saw that the Fed, speaking of those Treasury bonds, they announced that later this month they're going to buy fewer of them. It was like they're going to buy $15 billion per month fewer. And the article I read said, well, it could have been worse. They could have said they're going to buy $30 billion per month fewer. This seems to be them trying to address some of these inflationary concerns, right? I don't totally understand. Like, should we be happy that they're buying fewer Treasury bonds?
Well, they shouldn't be buying any Treasury bonds. That is part of the problem. They never should have bought any bonds. That was quantitative easing, but that is the mechanism for creating inflation. They print money and then they buy government bonds. And they are talking about tapering their bond purchase program where they're saying they're going to buy fewer bonds in the months ahead than they've been buying in the months prior. Although that is their intention, or though that's what they're pretending, I have a hard time believing they're going to be able to live up to that commitment. Because as the US government increases spending, and we know that we're going to get this infrastructure bill, we're going to get this Build Back Better bill, they're going to get passed, there's not going to be nearly enough tax increases to cover the cost. So the Federal Reserve is going to end up buying even more bonds. Even if it's saying it's going to buy less, it's going to end up buying even more because that's the only way to pay for all the spending. And by the way, the plans are going to actually cost far more than what the government claims. The government always underestimates.
Let me stop you there. I definitely want to talk about the Build Back Better bill, whatever. I mean, this is the new propaganda name for it. It's basically just a wish list of Democrats' social causes. But the infrastructure bill is already passed, so that one's going. And it certainly looks like the BBB is also going. So what you're saying is, let's say they pass BBB, and we already have the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill that's passed, that all those wish list items in there, they can't actually tax Jeff Bezos enough to pay for all of it. They can't. So they're going to run out of regular Americans to tax to pay for this stuff. So they're going to look at the Fed and they're going to say, you have to print more money and buy more of those American Treasury bonds because we need it. And so that cutback that they just announced isn't really going to be worth the paper it's printed on, the announcement, because we're going to be short dough to finance all these wish list items that are in these two bills. And the more we print dough, the more we drive up inflationary pricing and the more the average consumer gets pinched.
Yes. I mean, people have to remember that the cost of government is what government spends. So every dollar of government spending needs to be paid for. And so if it's not paid for through taxation, it's paid for through some other means, and that is inflation. And just because the Federal Reserve prints money and gives it to the government to spend, it doesn't mean that we're getting all that spending for free. We're going to pay much higher prices for consumer goods. And that means Americans are going to have to reduce their spending because everything is going to cost a lot more. And since we don't have an unlimited amount of money, people are going to buy a lot less, which is exactly what would happen if their taxes went up. If the government raised your taxes, you have less money, so you can buy less stuff. But if they don't raise your taxes, if they print money instead, then the price of everything goes up and you still end up buying less stuff because the stuff you need is much more expensive.
I see it. I mean, I use my mom as a benchmark. Obviously, I help my mom out, but she's prideful, and she doesn't really want my money. And so she's trying to make ends meet on her pension. She was a productive citizen all of her life. She's 80 now, but she's living on her pension, and she also gets Social Security. And so she's on this fixed budget, and those numbers don't go up. So she really is the person who gets pinched by the increase in prices and gas and so on, because none of her income goes up at this point. Only her expenses do. And she's living this real time like most Americans.
People who are on a fixed income are hit particularly hard by inflation because if you're younger and you still have a job, you can at least recover some of the inflation with higher wages. You know, you go to your boss and you say, look, I need a raise or I'm quitting, right? Because the prices are going up. And so you can get a raise. It may not be enough to completely offset the increase, but at least you get some of it back. But if you're retired and you're living on a fixed income and that income's not going up, but your cost of living is, and so it's particularly, troublesome for older retired people like your mom. And I think a lot of Americans who are preparing to retire now are going to have to rethink their plans because there's no way the money that they've saved and the income streams that they anticipate receiving are going to be sufficient given the much higher cost of living that we're going to be experiencing. And this is not just going to be, a few percent a year. We're talking double-digit increases in the cost of living for many, many years in a row. So a substantial increase, maybe a 50 or 100% increase, maybe even a triple in the cost of living. So if your income stream doesn't keep up, then you're getting poorer.
How can they even consider passing the BBB? It was 3.5 billion or trillion. I lose track. Trillion in Democrats' social items spending. Now it's reportedly down up to about half that, thanks to Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema. How can they even consider passing something that large, given what you're saying?
Well, because they don't consider anything. They're just completely reckless and irresponsible. But also, they don't understand the moral hazard that will be created by the programs that they're creating as part of this BBB bill, because government always looks at a particular situation and they assume, well, if we cover the cost, here's how much it's going to be. But what they don't understand is how much higher the costs become once the government subsidizes the activity, because now demand for whatever they're subsidizing goes way up, and so does the cost of what they're subsidizing. So if the government says it's going to cost 1.75 trillion, it's probably going to cost 5 trillion.